You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Welcome to Heritage Voices, episode 14. This is Jessica, and I'll be your host today. And today we are talking about nation building after federal recognition. All right, so before we begin, I'd like to honor and acknowledge the Nooch, or Ute peoples, on whose traditional homeland I am recording today, as well as the other tribes with ancestral connections to this land. I'd also like to thank all of the people, especially the Indigenous people, who helped Lyle and I to shape the original idea for this podcast and who've been developing where it is going. So again, thank you. And today we have Sandra Hernandez, Tribal Treasurer, and Colin Rambo, Cultural Resource Manager for the Tejon Indian Tribe, who are celebrating their 6th anniversary of federal recognition this year. They are the 566th federally recognized tribe. But before we get into all of that, Sandra, would you like to start us out with a prayer?
Yes, thank you for that. I'll translate the prayer into English after I've finished. And as always, we just ask for Grandfather to be with us and that we pray in the way that we've been taught, in the way that's comfortable to us. Tsuviam, ang tsakakat, punuk simirin, mat hunyut tsuviam, ang se shishichach, punuk simirin hak hunyut tsuviam, ang se uwa, punuk simirin hu hunyut tsuviam, ang se hu hunyu, punuk simak hikaw hunyuk tsuviam. Akikitamya, amai hamak buyutamya, all my relations. In that prayer that was developed by the Tejon Tribe's language class, we're asking our ancestors to be with us and to open our ears so that we can hear the words of our ancestors, to open our mouths so that we could, again, speak the words of our ancestors, to open our eyes so that we can see in the way that our ancestors saw, and to open our hearts so that we could feel as our ancestors felt. In the end, we're asking for this of Kitanamak people now and forevermore. So that's our Kitanamak prayer that was developed again by the language class.
Wow, that's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
You're most welcome.
Okay, so Colin, would you like to introduce yourself first?
Sure. My name is Colin Rambo. I am the Cultural Resource Manager for the Tejon Indian Tribe, and I've been working here actually 4 years in April. Will be my 4-year anniversary. And I was lucky enough to come on board with the Tejon Tribe in 2014, just 2 years after they gained their federal recognition through the reaffirmation process. And before I met the tribe, I was studying anthropology at Cal State University of Bakersfield, where I got my bachelor's of arts in archaeology and philosophy, and where I'm continuing my graduate studies in applied anthropology and public administration. So after I got my degree, I came on board with the tribe, and for the last 4 years, we have been building a cultural resource management program from scratch in order to one day open a formal tribal historic preservation office. And I spent a lot of time working with the tribe's cultural and spiritual leaders, such as my good friend Sandra Hernandez here. Sandra, do you want to introduce yourself?
Haku helpo, nitawanea Sandra Hernandez. Hello, how do you do? My name is Sandra Hernandez. I am the treasurer for the Tejon Indian Tribe, as well as a committee member for some of the tribe's various activities, including culture, language, education, and powwow.
Nice. Well, I guess the place that I want to start is for both of you. When you were a little kid, is this how where you thought you would end up, I guess? Like what led you to these different paths that you are both at right now?
Well, I'm actually really proud to say that I'm living my dream right now. I have always wanted to be an archaeologist since I was a little kid. You know, I hate to be cliche, but everyone sees those Indiana Jones movies and wants to, go on adventures when they grow up. But I learned really quickly in college that archaeology is not, some romantic adventure. It's a lot of hard work and research. And I think you heard me mention that I'm studying applied anthropology. And for me specifically, that is the meat and potatoes of anthropology. Being able to solve real world problems with anthropology is what gets me out of bed every morning. And the fact that I was honored to be offered a job with a newly federally recognized tribe, I literally can say that at that moment in time, I had achieved one of my dreams.
That's awesome.
I really hope to continue living that dream for many years to come. So.
Nice. Sandra?
For myself, it's interesting, you talked, the question framed around, when we were younger, what did we imagine? Is this something we imagined for ourselves? And I would say no, I did not imagine being in this position of leadership for a tribal nation. I remember being about 9 when my mom gave me the official BIA documents and showed them to me, showing me that, you're Native and this is what the government says you are. And it was, I think, a very eye-opening, pivotal moment for me, because everything after that moment became a hunger for finding out what that meant. What does that mean to be Indian, to be Native? Why am I just being told about this? Why do I not already know this and have just come into this knowing? So I think from there, it was just really set me on the course, for a lifelong passion of, again, what does this mean to be a Native person living in these times with this awesome responsibility before you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, okay, you mentioned that she had BIA documents, and at that point, Tejon wasn't federally recognized. So, were you referring to the state? Because Tejon was state recognized, right, at that point?
And those are the documents that I'm referring to, that when the state census came and gave all of the families their BIA document, it listed everybody just blanket across Kern County as Yokuts, which in essence is true, but there were other bands as well as other tribes that existed besides Yokuts on the valley floor. So our BIA documents all referred to us as being Paiute as well as Yokuts.
Interesting. Yeah, and I mean, the tribe has a really interesting history. Colin sent me the ethnohistory that he put together, the brief ethnohistory of the tribe, and it is really fascinating. Basically going from being the first reservation in California to then signing treaties and having those treaties basically ignored or not ratified. And so not even knowing it, all of a sudden the tribe loses all of its land. It's a pretty crazy story. And then basically losing federal recognition just because of a clerical error, if I'm understanding correctly. So I guess from your perspective, would you mind giving us a little bit of a background on your tribe's history?
No, I don't mind at all. Much of what you stated are definitely the high points in terms of how did we end up a federally recognized tribe, or actually what the term is federally reaffirmed, being a non-recognized tribe. Going back to some of those treaties that you mentioned that were, again, non-ratified, we were able to, the tribe, over, I think it was a 10 plus year period, gathering federal documents that showed and proved the treaties, what were signed and what was promised to the Kitanamak people, to the Tejon people. That also adds to the story. when you start calling people something that they're not, it's a very easy thing to be dismissive of an entire group and or set of people. And that's one of the things that we definitely suffered from as Kitanamak people. We are from the Kitanamak Nation, but we were referred to as the Tejon Indians by the government. It was a moniker that was given to us historically from the missionaries who came over. One of the first things that they saw on the valley floor were badgers, a lot of badgers, and that's the word Tejon in Spanish means badger. And so we became known as the Tejoneños, the people, the land of the badgers, so to speak. So in all of the government's documents, they were referring to us as Tejon, and it really did kind of displace our nation's name, Kitanamak, from being in the forefront of history. Even from tribal members today identifying with being Kitanamak versus Tejon is a bit of a challenge because we've been raised as Tejon Indians.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Getting back into some of the history of our tribe, it was written in some government documents that it was told to them that when it was asked of the very eldest person of our tribe, since when had the Kitanamak people been here, that elder's reply was, we have been here since the first time the first sun came up. And reading that, in federal documents and knowing that this was oral translation, that came down from one of our tribal elders, it was being asked of, I believe, a judge, someone within the courts systems who was at one point trying to assist the tribe from being displaced from the Tejon Reservation after it having been established from the San Sebastian Reservation. So, we fell into a very interesting category of Native people living on their indigenous land without any claim to the land itself, but remaining on the land, working the land under the Tejon Ranch, which it ended up falling into the hands of Tejon Ranch from previous ownership. So with our relatives having remained on our indigenous land and ending up working in part for Tejon Ranch in order to stay on the land, we all ended up residing on this very small piece of land that our family had been familiar with for, time forgotten, time bygone already. And it's interesting to note that even now, we estimate at least close to 85% of our tribal members remained in Kern County within, I believe it was estimated 25 miles of the city of Bakersfield. So many of us remained here in Kern County and specifically Bakersfield with ties to our indigenous land. With Tejon Ranch, I think the interesting thing to note is we're often asked, what is the relationship, these days with the ranch and the tribe? And I think that it's a contemporary relationship. It's one that we've seen shift and change. And in the end, I think we both want positive outcomes for our community and our agencies. And I think that we're both striving to ensure that, because we in part do share this name, Tejon, that we reflect it well. Both of the agencies reflect the name Tejon well and work towards a cooperative relationship of, again, a shared name.
Interesting. Yeah, and part of that you touched on there and that I found really interesting in the ethnohistory that Colin sent me was basically, so Tejon was more of a reservation in a lot of ways than necessarily just a people, because there was Kitanamak people, and then there was also other groups of people that for one reason or another ended up on the Tejon reservation. So there was a little bit of intermarrying and different things there. And then there was the people when you guys found out that this treaty that you thought had been signed and agreed on, giving you this land, was never ratified, and all of a sudden you find out that you have no land base, that some Kitanomuk people went to other nearby reservations and some stayed, and ultimately that there was, I believe it was 81 people that stayed in order, because they wanted to stay on this land that was theirs. Basically, so there was these 81 people that, from my understanding, formed the tribe basically today.
Correct. There was a census that was taken by a census worker, a government worker, that listed solely Tejon Kitanomuk individuals, while there were other tribes from the area out at Tejon. This census that was taken was specifically for Kitanomuk people. Our tribe's descendants of the census are today's tribal members.
Right. And one thing that I noticed in that I thought was really interesting, and I don't know if this is something you'd be open to talking about or not, was that Tejon doesn't have any blood quantum requirements.
Right. Blood quantum is a very interesting question, and I think that the council having that question put before them, we don't want to give value to a European system of what was given to us to dictate what quantified you as being a Native person. So even the term blood quantum, I've often spoken to individuals, both tribal and non-tribal, and been very clear, and we need to be very careful in the words we speak, and blood quantum is definitely one of those to walk carefully around. That really kind of lends to that thought of blood quantum doesn't mean anything.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, it's definitely a tricky one, and it definitely. Mm-hmm.
I was thinking right now that phrase that I just said, that it doesn't mean anything. And I mean, it's not that it doesn't mean anything. I understand, I guess, the importance that individuals could place in blood quantum. But I just think as a tribe, it's not something that we wanted to tie our members to. Mm-hmm. If we know our family members are our family members, then absolutely they're going to be our tribal members because of that, not because of the amount of blood that they have from their descendants.
My perspective about blood quantum is that it's a long-term tool to accomplish cultural and ethnic genocide, because one day your line is going to be more and more diverse, and you'll eventually not be able to meet a certain blood quantum. So it has like a timeline, an expiration date when you use a blood quantum. This way, Tejon, your family will only ever grow; it will never shrink.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, I like the way you put that. Your family will only ever grow; it'll never shrink.
That's nice.
And I definitely think that's part of the conversation when we're talking about blood quantum. I know that Executive Council is very adamant that we want to bring our family members home. We have this opportunity to bring our tribal members services that they possibly could not have had access to previously. And that's exciting for us. And why would we want to exclude people when we now have the opportunity to include everybody that should be included?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Well, we are already at our first stopping point. So we talked about the history of the tribe, and then we're going to come back and talk a little bit more current. So if you guys will all just hold on a minute, we'll be right back.
This network is supported by our listeners. You can become a supporting member by going to arcpodnet.com/members and signing up. As a supporting member, you have access to high-quality downloads of each show and a discount at our online store, and access to show hosts on a members-only Slack team. For professional members, we'll have training shows and other special content offered throughout the year. Once again, go to arcpodnet.com/members to support the network and get some great extras and swag in the process. That's arcpodnet.com/members.
All right, and we are back. Okay, so covered a lot there in the last subject. But one thing I want to clarify before we move forward, you mentioned that what Tejon did was actually a federal reaffirmation instead of a federal recognition. So could you clarify a little bit what the difference is there?
Sure. Essentially, what we ended up needing to prove to the United States government was that we had never been disbanded, that our tribe had never been disbanded the way other tribes throughout the state of California had been disbanded. So the process of federal recognition being that you have to prove that you're a tribe, whereas federal reaffirmation, the proof was just that we were already recognized. We had already been affirmed as a tribe. We just weren't on an actual list. So when we're talking about being federally recognized, the process for the Tejon tribe was federal reaffirmation.
I never knew that was an option.
It was something that was very dicey in the end. I'm not sure of the number, but I know that it's very slight. Of those 566 federally recognized tribes, I know that the number is very slight of who has been federally reaffirmed versus recognized. There's very few tribes that have gone through the federal reaffirmation process.
Right. That makes sense.
Right, and succeeded.
Right. Well, and because, it had to be, like, for you guys, for example, basically, it was a clerical error is what it sounded like, not so much anything else. So, like you're saying, you should have been recognized all along with all of the other 500 and some tribes at that point. So, definitely a different circumstance than how a lot of tribes, they get the state recognition and then move to the federal.
There's an interesting point on this thread too. Tejon was federally reaffirmed in 2012, and interestingly enough, 2 short years later, the BIA completely removed the reaffirmation process from the regulations. So Tejon will be the last tribe to be federally reaffirmed, if I'm not mistaken.
Wow. Okay. So any tribe after that would have to go through the full recognition process then.
Correct, which from that time I understand they've been working on correcting the process to streamline it, and hopefully it will benefit more tribes in the future.
Well, we're at 573 as of last month. There was those Virginia tribes that just got federal recognition. So you guys are, yeah. Congrats to all 5 of them. I think it was 5. Hopefully I'm not misspeaking here.
Were they recognized as one group or 5 separate?
5 separate, I believe. See, and now I should look before I misspeak.
I know it's funny because I'm trying to grab the story back, but I understood that it was 5 different tribes, but that they all went forth together.
Got it.
Oh, whoops. It was 6. See, this is what happens when I speak without looking at my facts. But yes, so congrats to the 6 latest federally recognized tribes in Virginia.
Yes, congratulations to them.
All right. So I guess moving on from there, if you were talking to these 6 Virginia tribes, you've had 6 years now since your federal reaffirmation. What has that process been like for you guys, and what kind of advice would you maybe give to these new tribes?
Well, definitely the process has been a new one. I think that it took a very long time to absorb the statement that had been told to us, which was, you are the founding fathers and mothers of your nation. That sentence, can really hold some weight if you let it get deep in. And that's, I think, exactly what we as a council did. And the process has been one of learning and one of growing and one of adapting, while simultaneously keeping 865 tribal members in the forefront of your mind with every single decision that you make every day. It's paramount. I think that the process behind really putting the concept of traditionally taking care of your people in this very contemporary time through the funds that are allocated to us, as well as being as adventurous or advantageous in your creative thoughts behind how you want to economically develop for your tribe. You know, those are some of the processes I think that we've really been trying to absorb and work with and get ahead of. I think in terms of, you know, you had said some advice, place value in your executive council that you have in place and designate them jobs, daily jobs. Bite the salary, bite the cost, whatever it is. Get your executive council active every day, 40 hours a week if you can, would definitely be my top advice to give.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's something that Michelle Lapina talked about in her interview as well, is how much of a struggle that can be for tribes if the tribal council, if there isn't funding for the tribal council.
Right. You know, our current council, we've all held jobs and done other things and are in those careers now. And being a governing official of a tribal nation, being a job in itself, I think that the time devotion behind the very important conversations that must take place is one of the great pieces of advice too. Have the discussions, and sometimes they're hard. We're talking about our families. We're talking about sometimes really awful or hard situations, but the more time that get to be devoted as a group to be together, to work through the problems, to get a creative solution is definitely time well spent. I think that the value in a tribe seeing their executive council at work every day should work both ways. Council working for the tribal members as well as the tribal members having daily access to those council people that are making the decisions for the tribe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you mentioned some really creative solutions. So I guess first thing, did you find that those came when you were looking at other tribes and what they had done, or when you were looking at your history and your people and what their approach might have been? Or I guess basically, like, where was your inspiration in this nation building process? And then could you maybe give us an example of one of those really creative solutions that you came up with?
Sure. You know, I could think of a couple of things, but I think that overall as a council, it has been an ongoing discussion that we've tried to adopt these processes and ways of thinking about our tribal nation. I think that in the very formative years, we probably had a year-long argument about, are we an agency or are we a family? Are we a tribe or are we an organization? Are we a government or are we a family?
Right.
And you know, there's so many different labels you can put to what you are, but I think that, again, going back to really some of those traditional thoughts that we as a council try to bring, it's we're a tribe, we're a family. How can we be family oriented in our solutions? I could just give a really light example of this. We had a tribal member, youth, who was involved in Future Farmers of America and needed assistance to purchase all the items that she needed to feed her hog and, you know, show them at the Kern County Fair and whatnot. And so we as a council decided to go ahead and support this. And lo and behold, she wins a prize. She has a prize pig gifted back to us.
No.
We have to go through problem solving of, what do you mean we have a hog to sell? And, you know, we put our calls out there and we know a couple of, you know, butchers, and we did our due diligence and secured someone to butcher the meat And it was given out here at our pantry to our tribal members, some of that meat from that pig that we initially supported from our tribal member.
That's awesome.
And, right, that circular approach to what we're trying to do to close the gap, close the problem and solve it, but not just solve it and close it to make it go away, but so that we remember it so we can circle back to it. Remember when we did that with that pig that one time? Well, what do we got now with this? Whatever it is.
Right.
I think that, that's a very small instance of a type of, solution-oriented approach that I think council really is trying to take whenever we're supporting something. How can it benefit the tribal member first and foremost, of course, and how can it make sense for us as a tribe to then give back to our tribal members the thing that we're supporting, whether it's community support in our community here, Bakersfield and our Kern County. How does that benefit us as a tribe, but also the tribal member who's involved in whatever community support is being requested? So I think this give and take approach to some of where we are as executive council and making decisions is definitely something that tribes could take and use, really think about something in a full approach.
That's an interesting way of looking at it. Okay, so you mentioned at the very beginning your culture and language programs, and I'm really curious to learn more specifically about how that tied into the nation building process and what you guys are doing.
Great. We'd love to, Colin and I, we can talk about culture and language all day. We're like, okay, we got to stop and go back to the real world to do on a day. But, I think just very easily to start off, I liken our culture to the phrase that you don't know what you're missing if you never had access to it. And I definitely think that that's something that is definitive for our nation, for our tribal members of our nation, that without access to our culture, to our language, we've almost been void of those things. There have been several families throughout the last years who have participated culturally through dance, through song, through drum. And it really wasn't until 2010 that our language program started for our tribe. In 2010, we contracted a linguist. Her name is Carly Tex. She's Mono from Fresno, California, and she graciously learned our language and came back and taught it to several of us tribal members, myself included with my family, my children, some of my nieces. And we worked really hard for several years to just kind of get the basics of our language down. I think that I was told a story that I'm always a bit hesitant to tell because it wasn't my memory, but I think it's very pivotal to where we sit now. So I'm going to go ahead and share that. It was told to me by my Aunt Catherine that when they were young, they would be running around at their own tone. And, anytime she's telling me about a tone story, I picture her and I imagine her and I see her face. And I see her barefoot, and just kind of running around. And when she was telling me this, she said that, they used to run around, and there was one of the grandmas who used to sit underneath a tree, and she would speak to herself in a language. And the kids used to kind of skid around her like, oh, she's talking crazy. She's talking that crazy way, and they kind of hid away from her a little bit. It was a foreign language to them. They didn't know it. They didn't hear it. They had no connection to it. And, my Aunt Catherine shared that, they would just kind of skirt around her, say, oh, she's talking like that again, and, kind of run away. And I've often thought of that visually in this contemporary time because we as a class have very much become that old woman under the tree, speaking to ourselves, trying to remember a language and learn a language from very few individuals. It's a very hard work, but a very rewarding work as well. And I think that, without access to the language, it's just something that no one had the opportunity to love.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody had the opportunity to pick it up and dust it off and learn how to say some of the things that we should know how to say. How do we thank Creator? My heart's good towards you. How do we say these things in our language again? And I think that that's definitely been where our language class has put some of its heart and effort into from 2010 up into this more recent time. We stopped formally having language classes about a year and a half, probably close to 2 years ago now. And we're just ready to hopefully accomplish getting some grant money to assist us with really forming and defining what we want that language program to look like and what we want it to achieve. And definitely that would be speakers. Me and my kids, we often laugh and say, we're babies in the language. We know how to talk to babies.
Uh-huh.
We're definitely hungry for every word that we learn. And it's been something that's really opened up something different for us as a family that I think I underestimated when we started. I remember we were told that the language wasn't going to call everybody, that it wasn't for everybody, but that you would know if it was. And I think that that's been one of the biggest gifts given to me from, I don't want to say from Federal Reaffirmation forward, but definitely from 2010 through now has given me probably one of the greatest gifts that I'll have for the rest of my life to be able to share with my family and teach our tribal members hopefully someday.
Yeah. Is that an experience that you've been able to share at all with your sister tribes?
So we have affinity to the Serrano language. And outside of that as well with the Chumash, we also share words with the Chumash language. And we've attended different conferences, language conferences, and got to see some of the tremendous work that our sister tribes are doing here throughout the state of California. And we really hope to meet them one day at that juncture that they've been able to arrive at, of having materials and devoted teachers and, just that being what we do every day. Again, Colin and I could do this all day, but definitely I've had to, slap my hand a time or two. Okay, put language down. It's time to go back and do your real stuff,
Oh, I think we all know that feeling.
What we got to do is get to a place where language is the real stuff. So we got to, so that we can put the other stuff aside and focus on what should really be the real stuff.
Right. I think that I shared with Colin so much professionally in terms of this work on council. I may be the acting treasurer, but everything that we do culturally is just as important as anything as we do financially.
Mm-hmm.
That's been definitely a hard sell in terms of just overall to anybody, I'm going to say, not to any specific group, but like what I said, you don't know what you're missing if you never had it. And I definitely think that that's where we're at with our culture in terms of loving it and putting it first and foremost in everything and anything that we do. Right now we're forming programs and starting different initiatives. And one of the goals that I'm chasing is to put our language behind each of those things, each of those programs, each of those arms of activities. And sometimes as a Native person, I have to remember to be patient and know that those things are not just going to pop out of thin air. They have to be right. They have to be what's good and what's coming to me in the right way. So I also have to be patient, with those things that need to materialize for our tribe in terms of putting our language on all of the things that we own, do, and run.
What a beautiful goal, though.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be a lifelong one. But I think those books right now are really up for the challenge. We've been given this platform, this seat at the table that, I really try to express to my own children that too many people lived a really hard life for you to take this for granted.
Mm-hmm.
even being a federally reaffirmed tribe, I think that council has always been very supportive of the tribes around us that are not federally recognized. And that's been something for us that we can, we know how that feels. We know what that means.
Right.
And I think that not taking that for granted is really, really important, and has been for us since 2012's federal reaffirmation, to really move with what we have, the opportunity that we have in front of us.
Oh, man. Okay. So we're already at our second break. But when we get back, I really want to talk about this fun stuff more, the culture program, what you guys are doing there, curation, GIS, et cetera, et cetera. So we will be right back.
The Archaeology Podcast Network has partnered with TeePublic to bring you some awesome gear that looks good, promotes archaeology, and puts a few pennies in our pockets so you can get free podcasts. Check out our designs at arcpodnet.com/shop. That's arcpodnet.com/shop.
All right. And we are back again. So we started switching more into your culture and language programs. So I'd like to more specifically hear about the cultural preservation program that you guys have developed, and Colin, a little bit about your specific role and what you are doing with the cultural preservation program.
So I just wanted to start by clarifying something I said earlier. Maybe you'll remember me saying that it was always my lifelong dream to be an archaeologist. Well, after achieving that, after getting my degree, I worked in cultural resource management archaeology for a while. And I think that was what helped me realize what I really wanted to be was an anthropologist, not an archaeologist. Because, too many archaeologists forget that they're not studying things, they're studying people. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you may find a cool arrowhead or a cool artifact, but that's not, the blood of anthropology. The blood of anthropology is people, understanding people, helping to evolve social structures and things of that nature. So working as an archaeologist, I actually met one of the tribe's council persons at the time who was working as a tribal monitor. And her name was Gloria Morgan. She was the tribe's first tribal monitor here. And I'm sure a lot of your listeners know what tribal monitoring is, but for those who don't, it's basically archaeological fieldwork from a different angle. Whereas archaeologists are attempting to acquire scientific data, tribal monitors are ensuring that the culture is respected and the artifacts are treated in a dignified way. And meeting Gloria at that time was very influential in my life, because I had realized that CRM wasn't really something I wanted to do after a few years of doing it. Mm-hmm. And it was just, being with Gloria every day, talking to her about her tribe, and, her inviting me to family dinners and things like that, and seeing the familial nature of the Tejon tribe and their welcoming, open arms. It really inspired me to devote my life to something. It wasn't just a job anymore. I knew that I was ready to devote my life to something greater than myself and even outside myself, to make an impact. And I can tell you, when we found, this is just one example, when we found the J.P. Harrington pictures from the Smithsonian, you remember that, Sandra? Mm-hmm. Finding those historic photos and seeing the smiles on people's faces when we brought them back, and understanding that we were, reclaiming a piece of history for the tribe, that was what sealed the deal for me. And, take that feeling and translate it into any program you want, whether it's tribal monitoring with, getting to train tribal members to work with archaeologists to actually preserve physical material culture, whether it's working with Sandra and the Powwow Committee, or Sandra in the language committee, or Sandra in any of her many other always putting culture first and always remembering that culture is at the heart of it all. And to me, that's a reward in itself, getting to come to work every day. I have a hard time calling this a job, to be honest, but one of the most exciting things that's happened in California recently was the passage of California Assembly Bill 52. And I know you talked about this with one of your former guests, and I think that's kind of how we got to where we're at here.
Mm-hmm.
AB 52 enables tribes to take care of their own cultural resources. The phrase is very legalese. It's something like AB 52 enables tribes to manage and accept conveyances of their cultural resources, or something like that, some legal jargon that we were able to translate into a federally compliant archaeological collections repository. So that law was passed, and it sparked the idea to build a repository here where the tribe could steward its own resources instead of sending them to, universities or basements in museums. Tribes could actually take care of their own heritage, and I think that kickstarted a lot of different things for us. So one of my other favorite things about working with a tribe is the exciting collaborations that we get to have with our neighbors. And I think Tejon is unique in its history because of its position in the the Central Valley of California. It was the gateway to the Mojave, the gateway to the Sierras, the gateway to many different environments. And the city of Bakersfield was kind of an intertribal gathering spot where a lot of tribal territories overlapped and a lot of intertribal ceremonies took place, at least from what I understand. So the place is special already, and then when you add the special history of the Tejon tribe having the first reservation in California, even though it was never really a formal reservation,
right.
It was the first attempt at one in California. And because it only lasted for 10 years, it's often glazed over in the history books, even though there's 3 or 4 books just written about the saga of Rancho El Tejon, or some of the other titles of books about Tejon Ranch. But those 10 years of history where it was in existence, there were a lot of different tribes that were brought to Sebastian Reservation, and I think the tribe today recognizes that multicultural importance of keeping culture alive, and that's why I'm so honored to work here, because I tell you, I've seen some other tribes, and unfortunately, it's not always the case where everyone gets along with their neighbors. But here at Tejon, I can name 6 tribes in every direction and tell you that we have a good relationship with them. For example, we have a 5-tribe NAGPRA coalition with 5 other tribes. The Tule River Indian Tribe, the Picayune Rancheria Chukchansi Indians, Table Mountain Rancheria, and Santa Rosa Tachioca Tribe. We meet once a month, and we work on NAGPRA claims together. Our Tabatalabal and Kawaisu neighbors to the north, those are the non-fairly recognized tribes that the council literally directs me to assist as much as possible. So that's part of my mandate, to assist our non-fairly recognized neighbors. The Chumash to the west, we're about to start working with them on some projects. Haven't yet, but I've been excited for this moment to work with them finally. And our neighbors to the south, the Tataviam and the San Manuel Serrano Indians, we're constantly collaborating on fieldwork projects together. So I'd say that the collaborative nature of this, and again, I don't like calling it a job, but of this field, is something that makes it really easy to get up and go to work every day.
Okay. I could literally talk about probably 10 different things that you just said. So I guess I'll just pick one, and let's talk a little bit more about the curation facility. And I guess, what do you see as the benefits, and what do you see as the challenges of a tribally run curation facility? Because I know you had mentioned that there was different reactions surrounding curation. So let's talk a little bit about that.
So there are federal regulations that dictate how an archaeological repository must be run, and that's 36 CFR 79. And I'm sure most of the people on the show know that there's a difference between a federally managed collection and a private collection. Federal archaeological collections will always remain the proper federal landowner, whereas private collections can be gifted and become the property of the museum. So the biggest challenge was anticipating the pushback from the federal agency going to invent different reasons not to curate artifacts here, because there has been cases in the past where tribes have set up restrictions on research and things of that nature, but that's not the case here. Our repository meets all the federal regulations, and in fact, we actually wrote a technical report that demonstrates how we meet the federal regulations, and that was probably the smartest thing I did, because it basically counteracts every pushback we get instantly.
And we'll put that in the show notes to that document that you were talking about. So if people are interested in learning more, or they're interested in doing the same thing for their tribe, they can read more about it.
Okay. Yeah, we'll just give you the website for our repository website.
Perfect. Okay. So we talked a little bit then about some of the challenges that you faced. What have been the benefits that you've seen?
Well, kind of like how Sandra picked one really great story earlier. I think I'm just going to do the same thing. Just pick one really great story to kind of tell that story.
Do it.
So the first collection that we accessioned at the Tejon Tribal Curation Facility was a collection from outside of the tribe's territory, actually. It was actually north of Tejon territory in Tabata country. It came from Forest Service land, and it worked out great because our first collection happened to be a federal collection, so we had to go through the whole deed of trust issue and get a federal agency to sign off on our facility. And once you have one federal agency sign off on your facility, it just kind of snowballs, and they don't even really worry about it too much once they know you have one. Now we haven't covered all the federal agencies yet, but we're working on that. And the Tabata tribe specifically requested that we curate their collection on their behalf. And that's a tribe with which Tejon is very close. So when the Forest Service delivered that collection, we called the chairman of the Tabata tribe, and he came down and we went through the collection together. And it's those little experiences, sitting there with a tribal chairman, going through his material heritage. It's just a special thing that you don't get to really do very often. And I think something I'd like to devote a lot of time to in the near future is helping other tribes get their own repository set up. So if there's anyone out there listening right now, please feel free to reach out, and I'd love to help you get your own repository up and running, help you find some grants, and give you some tips.
And one thing about the repository that you mentioned was that basically it's self-sustaining, right? If I understand correctly. Could you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so shout out to the IMLS, Institute of Museum and Library Services. We were awarded a grant to pay for all the startup costs of our repository. So usually you have to invest tons of money in your HVAC system, your heating and cooling, and fire systems and all that stuff. Well, we got a grant to pay for all that, so the tribe didn't spend $1 on any of that. And the good thing is you can charge curation fees for the boxes that you curate. So since we didn't have any startup capital to pay off, every single curation fee is 100% profit. And that kind of kickstarted another idea, which was to start a nonprofit foundation for the tribe. So now we're going to set up this nonprofit to kind of funnel all of our cultural revenues through our monitoring program, our curation fees. So we have some other things that bring in money. And hopefully this nonprofit foundation will be able to provide the funding for the tribe's powwows and their language classes and anything else that Sandra and the culture communities are interested in.
This work has been interesting because much of what we were speaking about earlier in terms of nation building and these very big questions and where some of this work ends us up at, it all ties together. And I think that some of what we really wanted to accomplish with a cultural program overall was accessibility, not just to our tribal members, but to the community at large. I think that we have a very good opportunity to be a very good education piece for our neighbors as well as our community and our tribal members. And this repository and its work was definitely one way that we can make some of these things accessible.
Yeah. So what other goals do you guys have? What else would you like to fund with this type of money? Where would you like to see the cultural program go?
Well, I know personally, when I'm asked these things in terms of our goals, I can definitely have a personal set of goals as well as a professional set of goals and somewhere meet in the middle, hopefully, with both of those. But I know that personally, I really hope to see that the development of our cultural program continues to grow in strength and visibility, especially within our tribe. When I'm speaking about, people not knowing what they're missing because they haven't had access to it, this is definitely one of those things that I hope will fill that hole. Until we're able to see the faces of our grandmothers in these pictures, or our grandfathers, or our great cousins, how will we ever see ourselves, within our tribe culturally? And I think having access to this repository and the repository's work is going to help our tribe bring back some of that cultural reclamation that we didn't have. I remember hearing one time that in order to revitalize, you have to reclaim. And I think that that's what this repository and some of our cultural work is for our tribe. It's us reclaiming these things as ours so that we can continue to revitalize them for everybody who's coming after us.
Colin, what about for you?
Well, again, I'm going to look back to something I said earlier. I mentioned how, Indiana Jones is everyone's cliche inspiration when they're talking about why they got excited about archaeology. I may never be able to, fight Nazis to go after the Ark of the Covenant, but I can definitely fight ignorance in my local community by, helping to do public outreach and public education, go to schools, and remind people that the Native American community is thriving. And it's definitely something that needs to happen because, as we've talked about before, in this local community, I would say probably at least 90% of people think the Tejon Ranch and the Tejon Tribe are the same thing. Would you say that's a fair percentage?
Oh, absolutely. I think that's one of, let's say maybe 10 years back when someone would ask me that question. Oh, the Tejon Ranch, how is that the same for your tribe? And my answer was often, well, they own and occupy my tribe's indigenous homelands. Mm-hmm. And then I kind of get these really weird looks that doesn't sound positive. And it's no, it's not, but it's a reality. And we're having to live in this contemporary time where, reality is what it is, and you have to move forward. And again, take that opportunity that you have in front of you to make something different, make something change, maybe make the community understand why there's a difference between Tejon Ranch and the Tejon Indian Tribe that are the Katanamak Nation, and how do those two things become synonymous, and why is it important that those two things are divided and defined individually?
All right. Well, we're coming right to the end of this podcast episode. So I guess, is there anything for either of you that you wanted to say that you feel like you haven't gotten to say yet, or anything that you want to end on?
I feel like we covered a lot of ground there. I just want to thank you for doing the show and for highlighting Indigenous voices. I think it's really important what you're doing. And
likewise, and for giving us the Tejon Tribe the opportunity to talk about ourselves a little bit and some of where we were and where we're at and where we're going, and just to encourage any tribes out there that has any questions in relation to the things that Colin and I were speaking about, that we're open to questions anytime.
Well, it's been an honor having you. It really is. Like I said on break, I could listen to you, Sandra, talk forever.
Well, I enjoy talking about our tribe, so it's something that I think, again, just the opportunity to speak about the tribe, it's a really fun thing to do.
All right. Well, thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Heritage Voices podcast. You can find show notes at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/Heritage Voices. Please subscribe to the show on iTunes, Stitcher, or the Google Music Store. Also, if you like the show, please share with your friends or write us a review. If you have any questions, comments, or show suggestions, please reach out to me at jessica@livingheritageanthropology.org, or you can find me on Facebook through Living Heritage Anthropology or on Twitter @LivingHeritageA. As always, thank you to Lyle Belenqua and Jason Nez for their collaboration on our incredible logo.
This show is produced by Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle, and was edited by Chris Webster.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Thanks again for listening to this episode and for supporting the Archaeology Podcast Network. If you want these shows to keep going, consider becoming a member for just $7.99 US a month. That's cheaper than a venti quad eggnog latte. Go to archpodnet.com/members for more info.